Imperium Maledictum, the new Warhammer 40,000 tabletop RPG using the D100 system, is on the way. In the previous video in this series, I covered the announcement itself and the basic details Cubicle 7 provided about the game. In this video, I'm going to talk about what we can likely expect from the new RPG. The previous D100 games are, generally speaking, fondly remembered. They're deep systems with plenty to enjoy and explore and offer an experience that the current D6 based system, Wrath and Glory, doesn't really offer, as that game has a completely different design philosophy. Having said that, despite the fond memories, the D100 games certainly had their flaws. The largest criticism levelled at these games, as it so often is with RPGs, was at the combat system. Like many RPG systems, the combat in the D100 games was designed to be fast and exciting according to the developers, but in reality, it was anything but.
Filth and lies!
There were some good aspects to it. The combat system was generally deep, with plenty of actions, talents and abilities and gear, which provided a lot of variety, and there was a satisfying tactical element to the gameplay, especially if maps and combat grids were used. While it was certainly possible to have exciting combats in these games, it was all too easy for your gaming session to grind down to a halt due to the combat system's flaws. The first issue was combat was pretty complicated, to the point where in order to try and remember the rules, players would often stop role-playing entirely and focus on combat as a separate, tactical minigame, which isn't what we really want in our role-playing sessions. Having complexity can be good for a game that you want to be more tactical, but more often than not, the complexity came about from the sheer number of factors which could influence the target number you were trying to roll under, in addition to the many special rules which could end up stacking in combat. Interesting complexity is fine, but mundane complexity is not. Another issue of the combat is that it could take far too long to resolve actions, as there was a lot of dice rolling involved. Once you'd done all the math required to work out what you needed to hit, you would then roll to hit. If you hit the target, you would then have to roll for damage. If you rolled a critical, you would then do separate rolls to determine further damage or exactly what type of critical hit you did, depending on which specific game system you were playing. And then, assuming they hadn't done so that turn already, your opponent would roll to dodge. If they succeeded the dodge, then all of the previous rolls by the attacking player were rendered pointless. This was a lot of rolling for something which could potentially end with no change to the game state. A long turn due to all of the rolling involved, which can result in nothing other than extending the downtime of the other players taking part, is not fun for anyone. This leads us to the final main issue with combat, which was the general whiff factor that could affect your characters. Few things were more demoralising for players than having to wait a long time for their turn to come round, roll a miss, and then having to wait for ages again before they get a chance to play. Now, it's fair to say that other than the excessive amount of rolling, none of these are issues which can't be minimised by a competent and experienced games master. But even with the best games master in the world, it did sometimes feel like the system was working against you rather than with you. Warning, we are now entering speculation territory here, so everything I'm about to say could end up being false. Having said that, I believe it's possible to make some fairly safe predictions based on Cubicle 7's statement on their website that Imperium Maledictum will be based on both the previous D100 40k RPGs and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. Being based on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, or WFRP for short, is of particular note as that game solved a lot of the issues I mentioned above. So, let's look at what we can expect Imperium Maledictum to fix as a result of what WFRP has already done. Rolling for initiative is personally a huge bugbear of mine as a games master. Few things grind my gears more in an RPG than announcing that it's time for some combat, then instantly pausing it so we can all do some basic math in order to work out the turn order. One of the things I like about Wrath and Glory is how it handles initiative. Play bounces back and forth between the games master and players, with the players deciding who goes when it's the player's turn and the GM picking which NPC to activate when it's their turn. It's simple and elegant, although not without its flaws. This kind of system, sometimes called popcorn initiative or variants thereof, doesn't really allow for initiative-based builds for those who want to play lightning-quick characters who always act first. In addition, while this kind of system is generally faster than rolling for initiative, it can actually end up being slower if you have a group of players who are prone to analysis paralysis. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition solves this issue rather cleanly by having initiative be a fixed characteristic which can be leveled up over time. Those who have a higher initiative go first, unless surprised. This means as a games master, if you're about to start a pre-planned combat, you've already prepared the turn order during your session prep, and if the combat is one that wasn't planned, it's trivial to look at the NPC stat and insert them into the initiative order which has already been determined by the player characters. Personally, this is my favourite way of doing it, although it's not for everyone. Warhammer is taking this into account by adding as a feature, which I hope they include in Imperium Maledictum, modular optional rules, so you can swap out that default rule system with rolling for initiative if you still want to be able to do that. Another change the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay introduced was modifying the D100 system to follow in the footsteps of other, more modern games, where a single roll is used to determine if and where you hit the enemy, and how much damage you do, which speeds up things greatly. Especially with dodging largely removed, you're literally rolling a third of the amount you would have rolled previously. Here's roughly how shooting works. Rolling to hit pretty much works the same as in the older system. You're trying to roll under a target number out of 100, which is influenced by your character's innate abilities, training, range to the target, lighting conditions, etc. Once you have that number, you want to roll a D100 underneath that target. The lower, the better. For every point of difference between the tens number of the target and the tens number of your roll, you score a success level, or a degree of success as it was known in the 40k RPGs. For example, if you need to roll 46 or less and you roll a 34, 4 minus 3 is 1, so you would succeed with 1 success level. Your weapon then instantly does damage equal to its flat strength characteristic, modified by how well you hit. For example, if you have a strength 4 weapon and hit with 1 success level, you would do 5 damage. If your strength 4 weapon hits with 3 degrees of success, it would do 7 damage instead. That's it from the attacker's side, one single roll. The defender subtracts their soak value from the damage as normal and takes that many wounds. There's no rolling to magically dodge out of the way at the last second and negating the damage. You're not Neo from the Matrix. You're only allowed to dodge being shot at if the attacker is at point blank range and you're aware you're being shot at, to represent the inherent difficulty of using firearms at a range where a knife would be preferable. Melee combat works slightly differently as well. I like how Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay does it in 4th edition because it's more dynamic and involves the defender a lot more. Melee attacks are always opposed, meaning both sides roll, and whoever scores the most degrees of success wins. If the attacker wins, they do damage as described earlier. If the defender wins, however, they parry the blow, unless of course they also score a critical success, which is defined as rolling doubles while rolling a success. If they manage that, not only do they parry the attacker's blow, they land a critical hit on the attacker as well. This makes melee much more exciting. Next up, we have guidance and movement distances. This admittedly falls under advice rather than actual mechanics, but the 4th edition rules do specify that the precise movement distances provided are only really necessary when using maps and combat grids. If running combat using Theatre of the Mind, distances should really just be boiled down to, are the enemy in range, and if not, how many turns until they are, rather than having you try to remember precise distances for every combatant. It seems obvious now, but such advice would have been really useful to me in my early days as a games master. Something that 4th edition added as a brand new feature to combat was the advantage mechanic, which simulated the overwhelming momentum one side could build up if they kept pressing the advantage. The idea was that giving the winning side so many positive modifiers that they would end combat quickly. The end result was a bit messier however, as keeping track of individual advantage scores quickly got tiresome and could make combat very swingy. This system was eventually fixed with the Up in Arms expansion book, which reworked advantage into being a group rather than individual resource and replaced the crazy modifiers with the ability to spend this resource on things such as tricking an enemy, disengaging from combat, or even to gain another action. Given that the original advantage system seemed to cause more problems than it solved, I imagine a version of the approved system will appear as an option or will be removed altogether. Related to, but separate from combat, I'm fully expecting a return of the Fate system, as it's an important aspect of the D100 games as it helps mitigate some bad luck. I wouldn't be surprised if we see an evolution of the more fleshed out version of the Fate system found in Warhammer 4th edition, rather than the more basic system used in the previous 40k games. In the previous 40k games, your characters would start with somewhere around 3 Fate points. Fate points could be spent each game to do things such as making tests easier, re-rolling failed tests, or other minor benefits such as recovering from fatigue or being stunned. Fate points refresh at the start of each session, but are otherwise a limited resource. If, however, a character dies, which is a fairly common occurrence in these games, they can opt to burn a fate point instead, even if they have no points left to spend. Burning a fate point reduces the maximum amount of fate points the character has by 1, permanently. The player and Games Master then decide just how exactly the character survived. This means characters last longer than they would do otherwise, and allow a player to mentally prepare for when they're going to lose a character, which becomes a much more likely possibility when they have no more fate points left to burn. The differences between these two uses of fate were called spending fate points and burning fate point threshold. Terminology which could prove confusing to some, so in Wolfrup the terminologies were changed and the system was expanded on. Fate threshold simply became fate, which you would burn to keep your character alive on death, and instead of spending fate points, a new stat called Fortune, which was equal to your fate level and refreshed every game session, was created. So far this is the same as was in the older 40k games, just with new terminology, but then they did go on to change it further. Fortune, the old way of spending fate, was simplified so it can only be spent on re-rolling a failed test, adding a success level to a test after it is rolled, and choosing when to act in the initiative order on a given round in combat, regardless of the actual initiative order. Permanently spending fate to avoid death was given an extra layer of nuance. When you spend fate now, you have a choice. You can choose one or two options. Die another day, which means instead of dying, your character is knocked out or swept away by a river or something else to avoid their end, but they no longer take part in the combat. Or the other option, how did that miss? With this choice, your character completely avoids the incoming damage by some extraordinary fluke and can continue fighting without penalty, but with no guarantee of survival in later rounds. This adds a nice layer of nuance to Fate and helps clarify some things, so I fully expect this to make a return in Imperium Maledictum. 4th edition did take things a step further, however, by also introducing Resilience and Resolve, and I'm curious to see if these will come to the new 40k game. Similar to Fortune, you spend Resolve to become immune to psychology for a turn, or ignore all modifiers from critical wounds, or to remove one negative status condition you're currently suffering from. You recover Resolve whenever you're acting according to your character's motivation as judged by the Games Master. Similar to Fate, you permanently burn Resilience, which you can do to either deny a mutation from manifesting, which is a risk when you are exposed to too much corruption, or to automatically succeed at a test rather than roll for it, making it a very powerful but very rare resource. Now that we've covered some of the changes we can potentially expect to the new system, I'll wrap up with 3 things I'd like to see included. First of all is to have a decent progress system. We know that we're going to be playing lower level characters, this has been confirmed. In Imperium Maledictum you are most certainly not playing a hero of the Imperium, rather an ordinary human thrust into extraordinary situations. But assuming a character survive, there needs to be a way for them to grow. It'll be interesting to see whether Cubicle 7 go for the class-based system present in Dark Heresy, Rogue Trader and Deathwatch, the open-ended system of Black Crusade, Only War and Dark Heresy 2nd edition, or the career-based system of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, or something else entirely. Regardless, whether it's built into the core rulebook or comes out later as an expansion, it'll be nice to eventually be able to do some ascended level play. Dark Heresy's 2nd edition had the option of eventually becoming an Inquisitor. Where it differs from Wrath and Glory is that in the D100 games, mechanically speaking, while you have better gear, you're not actually that much tougher than a starting character, which is the contrast I enjoy. Next up, I'd like to see an interesting downtime system. An aspect of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that I quite enjoy in the latest version is the downtime system it has. It reinforces the notion that the characters have lives between adventures that they use to work their regular day jobs, train, complete personal projects and the like. I'm not sure how suitable that would be for 40k per se, but the 2nd edition of Dark Heresy did touch upon this with projects which could be completed during downtime, such as the explication system in the Enemy Without expansion. Seeing this idea expanded on could open up some fun possibilities. Finally, I like to see meaningful benefits and consequences to bad life choices. Corruption in the D100 games usually comes about through exposure to the warp and warp-based phenomena through the process of carrying out your duties as a player character, or if the player decides that they're going to intentionally play a character who descends into chaos, and the existing system does a fine job of this already. What I would like to see though is some meaningful temptations where players genuinely weigh up the benefits of a somewhat morally dubious action in exchange for corruption. 4th edition fantasy roleplay touches upon this a bit with rules such as Dark Deal, which allows you to reroll a failed reroll, or to gain a reroll when you have no fortune points remaining by asking the galaxy to help you out, because you never know, something might just listen. Then there's also the Dark Whispers rule, which allows you to delay the ongoing effects of corruption by ironically doing something which actually aids the chaos powers, such as letting an enemy escape, accidentally shooting an ally, or falling asleep on watch. I'd like to see this expanded on, perhaps by taking inspiration from Call of Cthulhu, which features a multitude of heretical books and tomes which grant your character powerful abilities that will tempt a player, but at the risk of the character losing their sanity and becoming more corrupt. I'll be covering Imperium Maledictum more in the future alongside our regular Kill Team content. Drop a like if you liked the video and hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date with the latest news regarding the new 40k RPG. If you like what we do here and want to help support the channel, you can join us over at Patreon, where as a thank you, members get access to perks and benefits such as our private Discord server, early access to videos, and the occasional exclusive behind the scenes content. We'll see you next time.